Hey everybody, I was able to play another rapid game and took the Caro Kann for a spin again. And what did we see today? After the typical Caro Kann moves, my opponent captured on d5 and played c4, a very direct attack against our center there, known as the Panov-Botvinnik attack. And so I bring out my knight to support the pawn. My opponent intensifies the d5 drama here by developing the knight. I bring out my other knight, and white responds in kind. You know, one thing that we can really gain from this video is a sense of, you're going to not know openings perfectly or, have it memorized or, tattooed behind your eyes, however you want to think about it. And that's a good thing. You want to get out there, have a general narrative or story you're trying to tell in the opening. And when a detail doesn't quite seem to fit or work out, it's a great opportunity to learn more about the opening and maybe chess, overall. So here I remembered two moves, a6 and bishop to e6. Not the most obvious moves in the world. And we should just briefly mention, why wouldn't you just, in typical Caro Kann style, bring out your bishop and pin the knight? Well, truth be told, this is a perfectly solid way to play, but it gets rather forcing, and there can be a disappearing act where all of a sudden all of the pieces vanish, and before you know it, you start in the opening, you blink, and you're in some simplified ending. So what do I mean by that? Well, here white can play cd5. We take the pawn. And now white has the really interesting move, queen to b3. And so now the knight is no longer pinned, and the queen is intensifying the pressure there against our knight and the space that our bishop left behind, b7. So just to give you a little bit of a sketch here, we can take the knight, and then white will recapture. And now our knight is under fire, so we can reinforce our knight. White captures a pawn, and now we play knight d4. And for a moment, in just a moment, it feels like all the world is green and that black is doing very well, and black is doing fine, but we're not crushing here because white can play the move bishop to b5. And our king is under fire, and after the knight takes the invading bishop there, now white plays, you guessed it, not here, which you could play, but there's a nice nuance, queen c6. And here you keep an eye on the knight. We're definitely going to capture that piece, but by throwing in the check on this square, you're no longer able to block with the queen, which is what you'd probably do if the queen directly captured the knight. But here, if you try to block, you lose your rook. So that means the king is forced up the board. Now, how does the theory go again? I think we can take the knight. Is that the idea? Like so? And then, yes, okay. And then queen d7, offering the trade of queens. And after knight takes knight, attacking the king, take, just like that, you were in an opening, and now you're in some kind of technical ending. A very interesting one that if you're, inspired to dig deeper and explore, it will reward you. But I don't know how you feel, but I would rather not go from opening to endgame in such a forcing way and have to remember some delicate, intricate lines to reach this exact moment unscathed, because black can go wrong easily. So that is why bishop g4, excellent move, nothing wrong with it at all, but not my cup of tea. And so going back, I was trying to remember a6 versus bishop to e6. And it turns out what I was attempting to perhaps play was a6, which was recommended by Christoph Zielecki and Grandmaster Lars Schandorf, two chessable courses where this move is recommended. And I haven't looked at either course too deeply. And so I remembered the idea in a kind of vague sense, like push the pawn, maybe stop a bishop from coming here. I think that might be the move, but then I also remembered this move. And so, first of all, why on earth are we pushing our pawn here? Well, I mentioned, it's preventing a piece from jumping in here quickly. But the other cool point is if we look at, a comparison, we played bishop g4, right? And in that line, white captured, we recaptured, and then queen b3 was played. And here, with the bishop on g4 and the pawn back home, in that line, black was able to take, and we reached a rather messy position that ultimately simplified into a technical ending, right? Well, here, because of the trick playing the pawn first and not declaring the bishop, interestingly enough, black has this powerful and rather strange-looking move, bishop to e6. And the basic point is you're reinforcing your knight. You're putting pressure there on the diagonal against the queen. And although you might think, hey, you're standing in the way of your bishop there, you're probably going to fianchetto. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but the point is black is setting up a small trap. White is unable to take the pawn because here you can play knight a5. And all of a sudden, where can the queen move? It's actually trapped. So I didn't remember all those details. And it turned out when I was looking at these lines, after playing a6, if I believe it's bishop g5, putting pressure against the knight, which is guarding the pawn, and therefore there's pressure against d5, meaning we have 1-2 defenders versus 1-2 attackers. So removing the guard, winning a pawn is a threat. Here, black can play bishop to e6. So a lot of similarities, but with the clock ticking, I didn't remember them, but I did remember paging through a book by Victor Boligan on the Caro Kann, and I remember him mentioning that bishop e6 was an old Alekhine idea, a former world champion Alexander Alekhine. And it turned out I forgot my chessable theory, but I stumbled into an old friend. Alexander Alekhine played this, I believe, 1932 against Dane. Is that right? I remember looking at it in Boligan's book today. And he mentioned that Alekhine actually lost badly. Like he played this move, lost not in a very impressive manner, and nobody played the line for like 50 years. But anyway, it has some parallels to that A6 line. I just kind of misremembered the details, but that's the whole point. Like, don't stress out, gain a general idea of like how you want to play, but at the end of the day, you might miss a detail or two, and that's how we learn. And it turns out this line is also perfectly playable. So I'm defending the pawn, and I'm adding a second attacker against the pawn there on c4. My opponent decided to play bishop to g5, and here I played g6. Notice, since I have two defenders, I'm not worried about this trade yet, meaning I have, two defenders versus two attackers, so holding the balance more or less. Now, after the bishop captures the knight, I recaptured, and then my opponent captured on d5, and then I recaptured. And now we reach a really interesting moment. My opponent played bishop to b5. So on one hand, you can say my structure looks a little bit weird, but there's 4 pawns over there, so they can keep my king relatively safe. And sometimes, I think we freak out about doubled pawns a bit too much. Like here, yeah, we have doubled pawns, but they both, I think, are healthy doubled pawns because this knight, the forward squares, are actually dominated by this pawn. So like with the knight being pinned, there's no knight e5 to like pressurize that knight. And okay, I'm feeling okay about my chances. But here comes a critical question. How would you develop your bishop from here? After you had a moment to think, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts versus what I did. One issue, I think, basically, why do I ask, where do you want to develop your bishop? I'm feeling the heat, right? The center is wide open, and I still need 2 more moves before I can castle in either direction, right? And so as I was thinking, I have to admit, I thought about, when you say where to move the bishop, you might only look at dark squares. And that would make sense. That's the only color complex where this particular bishop is fluent. But sometimes you can be a bit too tunnel vision focused in that I have to admit I looked at this for a moment and I said, hey, that's not a bad move from the dark squared bishop's perspective, really active. And then I forgot I would be hanging a light square detail, the other bishop. So where else could we move? Could throw a pin in. I think that's reasonable. Wasn't sure about it. I thought about here with the idea of give me two moves, bishop g7, and I'll castle. And then my bishop might really target that isolated pawn. I liked that idea a bit, but then thought, well, there is a check. So this is kind of an example of what do you want? What does your opponent potentially want? And can you kind of work through a compromise? And here I made a move that might look a little bit weird. You could say I overshot the fianchetto. I actually developed my bishop to the h6 square. And here I think it's a pretty nice diagonal. White is not castling long anytime soon with the bishop there. And the other idea is that after queen e2, now I have an additional option that I wouldn't have with the bishop on g7. Here, my opponent could play queen e2. And if I play king f8, I mean, it's possible, but I feel like I'm a little bit cramped. I feel like I'm kind of stepping on one another's toes here from a standpoint of harmony. And at the end of the day, you know, if I don't want to move my king, what else can I play? Well, if I move my bishop back, usually not a good sign, you know, that I'm moving backwards here. And I think d5 might be a problem. I don't like the looks of that one bit because the bishop is pinned and we might lose material as we're now forking the bishop and pawn, bishop and knight with a pawn, in fact, attacking two pinned pieces at once. So that doesn't feel great. And if I try to block, like offer a trade of queens, I think my opponent would be more than happy to do so. And then there goes the bishop again, losing a piece. So going back, you know, we might have a group huddle here and say these are our general ideas. And it's always important to kind of ground ourselves with, you know, our opponent's side of the conversation. So that's why I moved here. My opponent threw in a check. And now I can play king f8 with the plan of residing on the g7 square. And here my opponent, I think, made a critical error. Not like they lose the game because they made this move, but I can understand feeling a bit of pressure, meaning they might have been worried that I can now take the knight and potentially attack, let's say the queen recaptures, you know, the knight. I could attack the queen, the bishop, and maybe even threaten a fork. So maybe they saw that idea, like here, 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 fork. I don't want any of that business. And they played rook d1. My problem with what they did is I feel that's not the most urgent move to play. And also, it's only half the story. In other words, where you feel the fear or the anxiety of this capture and it feels very unfortunate, well, you are awakening some rather powerful resources, meaning what if I play the move I want to play? So if I'm white and I'm not worried about this pawn falling, like what am I going to prioritize? Probably, you know, king safety, get my king to the king side, connect the rooks, do my thing. And the point is, if you take me, I take back, and you throw a knight d4, now we get a really complicated mess because, sure, you want a pawn for a moment, but now I can respond in kind. Black can attack the queen, sure, and then maybe something like here. And it's a mess. It's a game. We're playing chess. And so just kind of a reminder that if you find yourself tempted to play a move like rook d1, ask yourself, is there more to that story, right? That's a move that's saying, I don't want to lose a pawn. But maybe you're not losing a pawn at all. And so I think castling would have been a better move. Rook d1, maybe a little bit slow. I fianchetto my king, and now white castles. And here, I'm able to gain a critical tempo against the queen. I am pinning the knight to my rook, got to be aware of that. But this also speaks to the power of the bishops here. I have a lot of pressure here on the dark squares, and my other bishop is exerting pressure there against the knight. So it could have been possible for white to make this trade maybe a little bit earlier, by the way. And so the only way for white to still keep contact with the knight is by moving the queen here. If they move here, I'm trying to remember my analysis here. Here, I think my point was, yes, I was going to take the knight. Black kind of compromises white's structure. And here I can confidently reveal the pin against the rook and self-pin my knight against this rook. But the reason I'm cool with that is that I'm threatening the queen. And so this would work out fine. I'm threatening check, by the way. And if they play a move like here to pile up pressure against my knight, no problem. I can trade. And at the end of the day, I'm winning a little bit of material. So that's a really positive sign. So here my opponent played queen to d3 to keep connection with the knight. But that's a very fragile connection. After knight b4, exposing my rook to the attack there by the bishop, I'm threatening the queen, and there's no way to keep contact with the knight. So therefore, in fact, if you look at white's queen, e-file, out of business, pawn guards here, bishop guards there, knight guards here, bishop guards, all the dark squares. The queen has to reluctantly return to b1. So definitely an opening success for black. And now I make a trade to double the pawns and really weaken the king. So I felt good here. And I think it's kind of an instructive moment if you flip the board, and you look at it from white's perspective, and, maybe they don't feel great about their opening. Where do we go from here? Like if I ask you, what's a good move for white? And sorry, I should throw in rook e7, by the way, because that's what I played. My bishop, the bishop was attacking the rook, so I played here. If I asked you, what is a good move for white? It might not be entirely obvious what to play here, right? I mean, you might say, well, I could trade rooks, but then maybe the pawn falls. How do I improve my position? Not easy to answer that question. One thing when you feel stuck, I highly advise to kind of flip the script here and be like, what would my opponent like to play next? In other words, if black had a move, I would love to move my knight to d5 because right now it's a little bit isolated, and I'm going to try to mount pressure on the king side. So my knight would love access to d5. So therefore, what if we play it ourselves? That way you're gaining a little bit of space there. You have a passed pawn, and you're also opening up the d4 square maybe for a rook later. So not the easiest move in the world to find, but one you might find when you feel stuck and you're like, I don't know what to do. Then you can kind of ask, well, what does your opponent want? And it might help you figure out, hey, why don't I keep that knight at bay and prevent it, from easily getting to the king side? So I think that would have been a critical opportunity for white to, make things complicated. Instead, they attacked my knight, and then I centralized my knight happily. And after the knight moved here, I played a6. I attacked the bishop. They moved back. Here I probably could have played knight f4, and I think that would have been a better move. My knight is really just kind of clamped down on the f4 square. That's the advantage of wrecking the structure here. There's no pawn to ever attack me here or here. The bishop guards the knight, and I'm dreaming of maybe a harmony between the queen and the knight in the future. So that would have probably been more accurate. I played rook c8 and basically said hey, if you want to take and help me develop, I'm cool with that. You have an isolated pawn. King side is really weak. I might, try to attack over here. So I felt okay. My opponent played queen to a2 to back up the bishop. And here I didn't blink twice. Here I said, okay, of course, I will jump into f4, and now, give me a few moves, and good things are going to happen. Now here my opponent played b4. And I think this is not a good sign because all of a sudden my opponent's making a move that doesn't really, accomplish too much, especially when we want to know, like, where's the main theater of action, right? I'm going to start attacking on the king side, trying to build a wave over there. So maybe white should be thinking about moves like rook e1, with the point that if I play something like queen d7, trying to get a quick checkmate, at least you could get your bishop back here and try to hold on to everything. So I don't think my opponent sensed the danger yet and played b4. I decided to attack the bishop, and basically I gave my opponent an option. Are they going to try to stay on this diagonal, keep a little flexibility? And they ultimately decided, no, I'm going to keep pointing toward the king side here. And once this was played, I don't really think there's a point of return for white, because now I can play queen to d7. And all of a sudden, look who's knocking on the door, right? And there's no real way to defend. My opponent played king h1. I played queen h3, threatening mate. My opponent defended, but now I'm able to check here with mate to follow. So hopefully you enjoyed this game, a very interesting one, and hopefully also a good reminder, regarding opening study. I get a lot of questions about, I'm about to play in a tournament and my openings are junk, and what do I do? And my advice is find an opening you enjoy and one that inspires you to learn more and to kind of grow into, and stick with it, at least for, 6 months to a year. And if you don't like it, or it grows old or something, play something else, no problem. But the Caro Kann is an opening that I enjoy a lot, even though I know very little about it at this point. And here my opponent played the sharp line, and I forgot the theory. Here you are, National Master, move 6, forgetting theory. Well, that's kind of a good thing. I don't want to forget theory. I don't want to remember theory. I want to understand my openings. And understanding comes through practice, error, and reflection, right? And so here I had two competing and somewhat related ideas in my head, and I went this way, Alekhine style. And my opponent, played reasonable looking moves, but at the end of the day, what I felt really good about was this moment, that I wanted to play here in castle and play like f5 and put all the pressure on the IQP, but I thought about what my opponent would play next, and I found queen e2 really annoying. So I felt good about finding this move and being able to sort of harmonize on the king side and get rolling there with rook e8. So appreciate everybody supporting the channel. It's very experimental, right? Like this morning, still dealing with some kind of ailment that isn't going away very easily. And I'm showing some examples of me struggling with Puzzle Rush, right? And as the puzzles get more difficult, I'm going to struggle quite a bit. So I do hope, for those of you interested, I know not everyone's going to watch that whole video, but I'm doing it in such a way to be like, hey, this is where I'm at right now. These are the things that I'm seeing. And it's kind of an invitation for you to kind of check out how you would be thinking in a puzzle and compare my thoughts with yours. And I'm sure there's moments where you're noticing I'm missing some details that you're picking up. And that's perfect. It's exactly what I want to see, right? I'm a fellow student of the game, right? Remember that. A fellow traveler, a fellow student. And so I'm going to keep sharing some of my rapid games, hopefully as a way to also show you like, hey, there's no magical solution to opening Nirvana. We're going to mix up details, and it's a good thing, right? Because then you kind of think about your story again, and you think about new details, and you kind of work through them. to be ready to tell a better story the next time you play. So with that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.